the Sacramento Convention Center. Hey there.
I'm at the Sac Anime in Sacramento, obviously. It's at the Convention Center. Please look at all these people. Yeah, what is it?
Buff Fairy.
Buff Fairy. From where?
From Homestuck.
And I wish I knew what that was. Please look.
Throughout the 2010s, one particular fandom plagued the cosplay space. An immature group composed mainly of high schoolers appearing in droves and taking over the convention floor. Their immaturity and misuse of cosplay materials gave them a bad reputation. Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm sick and twisted, so I decided to do my Media Subcultures project on Homestuck Cosplayers. Hi, Professor Fallon, thanks for letting me do this. Now, this video will be an investigation into Homestuck cosplayers, what made them unique, what made them hated, and how I think that makes them their own specific subculture within the greater cosplay community. I'll even touch a little bit on how they're viewed in a post-Homestuck world. I got into Homestuck around 3 years ago, which puts me into the category of newer fans that sort of joined on during this recent Homestuck renaissance that happened from what I believe to be mostly quarantine boredom. I know for myself it was that. I started reading it with some of my friends, and it has changed our brain chemistries ever since. Since then, I've gotten into cosplay, mainly Homestuck cosplay. It was what really made me start taking it seriously. So, on that note, let me get into something a little bit more comfortable. I'll be right back. So I decided to go into the wild to investigate this exact topic and ask people on their opinions. Sir, do you know anything about Homestuck? Sir? Do you know about Homestuck? Sir? But I found no luck inside of my own home, so I needed to go out further. I needed to go and find out what people thought about the Stuckies. Were there Stuckies out there? I don't know. But it's up to me to go and find that out for myself and truly go out further into the wild. For part of my research, I put up 2 Google forms, one for fans and for non-fans. In total, I got 165 responses back, but the fan one, while getting me 127 responses, the non-fan only got 38, which I believe is just over the amount I need for a large sample size. Obviously not as equal of a response I'd want for both, but inherently I understand that if you're not familiar with something, you're way less likely to fill out a Google form on it. Now, what exactly is Homestuck? Well, my dear viewer, it was a webcomic started in 2009 by Andrew Hussey. It ran until 2016 and was extremely popular online. It became basically unavoidable online and even offline, as I'll talk about later. It was so popular that the finale of its Act 5 crashed 2 whole websites, its host site and Newgrounds. I've read some stories that Hussey was apparently receiving 1 million visitors a day during the peak of its popularity. Just to give some more examples of how popular this was, it raised over $2 million on Kickstarter for a game based on the comic, which ended up turning into Hiveswap later, and Acts 1 through 5 got turned into hardcover books. But despite its popularity, it was never really able to hit the mainstream in any way. Not like other properties that have come from it have, like Undertale or Deltarune, which was created by Toby Fox, who worked on Homestuck. Now, what is it about? Well, my dear viewer, for a quick rundown, it is about 4 kids who play a game that brings about the end of the world. Along the way, they meet a cast of 12 weird internet trolls who actually turn out to be aliens called trolls. It's a lot. It's a really weird story. It's long and complex. It goes just over 8,000 pages. It has 3 to 4 hours of animation content. It has several games within it. It's a huge multimedia project. And Homestuck as a comic is also known for its very problematic themes that exist within it. I'll put the trigger warning list on screen right now. There's a lot of stuff in there that I can't really get into at all in this video, since this is a school project specifically on Homestuck cosplayers being a subculture, but there is still a lot of interesting stuff to be said and how these problematic themes interact with the fandom space, but once again, another whole topic, and it will cause me to be here forever. Alright, now that we have all of that out of the way, we need to take a brief intermission here with non-cosplay Lily to discuss what exactly defines a subculture. So I've brought here the famous Nepeta Leon of Homestuck fame to talk about what subcultures are. Could you please explain that to me?
Why, yes, I can. Kim Gelder defines subcultures as groups of people that are in some way represented as non-normative and/or marginal through their particular interests and practices, through what they are, what they do, and where they do it. Subcultures are formed through how one defines a society, and what is the deviance to this society. As groups, they are always in the process of acting upon, and being acted on in turn by, the world around them. Some subcultures are alternative or unconventional, others of which are transgressive and even oppositional as a response to the society they exist within.
Well, that was very interesting. Thank you so much, Nepeta. I didn't know you were a scholar of Ken Gelder. It's really quite interesting. Now, that's something interesting about cosplayers, is they're not your traditional type of subculture in that way. They're not constantly being acted on, at least not in visible ways. As Crawford and Hancock put it in their book, Cosplay and the Art of Play, unlike traditional subcultures, like goths, punks, and mods, cosplayers are not a social group we regularly see in public places, as cosplayers are rarely seen in their cosplay or cos outfits. I would say they fit into the realm of media enjoyers more so than anything else. Say, like a fan of manga is way less recognizable than somebody participating in a fashion subculture like goth. So what exactly makes someone a cosplayer then? Well, we can define it in three main ways. First, unlike activities such as fancy dress, cosplay usually involves considerable commitment from participants, particularly in researching and crafting a costume, character, and narrative. Second, an important aspect of cosplay is the performance. When a cosplayer publicly wears their costume and performs an identity, which they associate with their costume, this becomes a form of costume play. Third, cosplay is a social and sociable act. It is a community and subculture that exists both online and offline, and which is located within a wider social and cultural landscape. So now that we have our basics down, let's actually get to talking about what makes Homestuck cosplayers their own subculture. And you might be thinking, Lily, they're just like other cosplayers, except they mainly cosplay Homestuck. And I think there's a lot unique about them, actually, both good and bad, and I think there's a lot of things that sort of made them form into their own specific group. And I must preface one more thing before we go any further. I will be referencing a lot of first-hand accounts that I can't exactly verify, because they're Tumblr posts, forum posts, things made like 10 years ago now that I can't exactly verify, but I have to take and use because this is the only way that these stories persist on. So I tried my best to parse out what I think is true and is not true, and you have to keep in mind that a lot of these are not unbiased information, and people can lie on the internet, so feel free to take all of this with a grain of salt. The first and most obvious reason was the sheer numbers of them. It wasn't an uncommon sight to see herds of Homestuck cosplayers walking around.
So there's this whole crazy Homestuck conga line. Apparently this is a tradition for the end of the day, just something crazy and Homestuck related happens. Jeez, how many of them are there? There's a lot more. Look at this, they keep coming.
Meetups and photo shoots could have hundreds of people at them. The Homestuck Stairs picture showcases it perfectly. Has anybody actually counted how many people are in this photo? I don't want to try, somebody else do it, but there's definitely a lot here. In a post on Tumblr from 2016 that acts sort of as a retrospective on the Homestuck fandom during its peak years, Sierra Sarcasm wrote about just how many people could be at these photoshoot meetups. Homestuck was also the first fandom to finally force conventions to start making rules and limitations on fan-run photoshoot gatherings, which they'd previously just ignored or discouraged altogether. Homestuck shoots were so big, conventions had to start working with them. The Saturday photoshoot at Otakon that Alex and I ran at Homestuck's peak had estimated over 700 attendees, and the next year was the year Oda started regulating their photoshoots through official channels. Of course, with any popular media, there's going to be tons and tons of these cosplayers walking around, but Homestuck was just unprecedented in how many people there were. Part of this was due to the ease of cosplay itself. This invited a ton of new cosplayers to the scene. Most of the stuff could just be bought at the store, pretty much. For example, to cosplay one of the human characters from the comic, like Dave Strider, all you really need is a white and red raglan shirt, black pants, sunglasses, maybe a wig, and then something to make his shirt symbol with. The trolls were pretty easy as well. Just craft some horns out of clay and add some gray body paint on, and boom, you're a troll now. Pretty easy, right? Right? The body paint will come up a lot later, causing a good bit of issues, but for now, pretty easy cosplays, bringing in a lot of new people, perfect formula for herds of them being around.
Too many Homestucks. Homestucks.
There's also a huge variation in the cosplays. Each character in Homestuck went through several forms and outfits through the different updates. And also every character, no matter how little screen time they got in the comic, got cosplayed. You can bet they were cosplayed. Say a character like Tavra's Sprite, who I think appeared for only like 2 pages, has tons of cosplays. People were really passionate about it, scrambling after every update to cosplay the next new thing. It was almost like a challenge, and in some ways it actually was. Seer of Sarcasm also wrote in their post, "Gotta Go Fast and First took on whole new levels because as soon as a new design was released, the first person to put together a cosplay for it got an intense amount of notoriety, mainly because it was generally just a few hours after the design appeared. Hell, I was once at a con where Homestuck updated on Friday, and the next morning somebody had made a cosplay in their hotel room and wore it to the con." An example of this quickness can be found in a Tumblr post by user Lands of Flash and Film. These 2 cosplays of Crocketeer Jane and Grimbark Jade were debuted the same day as the comic updated, debuting these designs. There's an unmatched passion with Homestuck cosplayers wanting to explore pretty much every way they could cosplay these characters. They even cosplayed fan-made versions of these characters, such as this design of Trickster Rose that's only found in fan art, has been cosplayed several times. It's really quite creative to me and really awesome how much people wanted to just do it for the joy of cosplaying. Alright, now that we have the more lighthearted stuff out of the way, we needed to talk about more what actually made the group infamous, cause yes, there's a lot of cool and creative stuff we can talk about in relation to Homestuck cosplayers, lots of positive things, but there's also the horrors, and the things that I think caused them to become their own subculture. In the Google Forms I put out to fans and non-fans, I put on both, what is your overall perception of the Homestuck fandom? On the fan one, the answer skewed more positive overall, while some people were still mixed, while the non-fan one skewed overall much more neutral / bit more negative, which is honestly kind of what I expected to get back. And people were able to put in their opinions on this topic as well. You guys are weird, in parentheses, loving. Insane, chaotic, weird by fandom / Tumblr standards. When I was younger, it was a negative view as that was the tone that was often perpetuated around the fandom on the internet. While I never acted upon that view, my knee-jerk reaction during middle to early high school when hearing about Homestuck was a negative one. Once I matured, obviously, I quickly realized how silly it was to judge someone based on fandom. I wasn't in Homestuck, but my sister was. I remember online there was hate for them being obnoxious and getting gray face paint all over some bathtub in a hotel or something. A lot of Homestuck cosplayers were seen as annoying, immature, for multiple reasons. The way they interact with non-Homestuck cosplayers, the way they are a little too in character. There's a lot of first-time cosplayers, like I mentioned before, who didn't know proper cosplay or convention etiquette. All those things. There's a 2012 article from iFanboy on Homestuck in their Craze column that I think summarizes how people felt about them pretty well. I didn't ask anyone for a long time what was going on, until I started to see actual hordes of these cosplayers congregating en masse and acting more annoying than most fandoms I'd ever encountered. Seriously, a bunch of gray-skinned, screaming teenagers acting like their blood had been replaced with caffeine. It was like they were trying to out-annoy and out-obnoxious everyone else at the conventions and cosplay gatherings, by screaming weird phrases like, "Oh my god," and clutching buckets, yelling weird sexual innuendos about them, photobombing Italia, another anime fandom, photo shoots, etc, etc, etc. Now, it's not uncommon for people to obviously play the character they're acting as, but people just took it the extra mile in this fandom. People got really attached to these characters and would just roleplay with anyone and everyone. 2011 is where a lot of the fandom's chaos sort of started. It's where a lot of the infamous stories came from, such as, well, not even a story actually, this is a real video that I don't even want to put into this, which is the Homestuck spit bucket video of people spitting into a bucket in a public restaurant for what I can only describe as a sexual innuendo within the comic specifically for trolls. There was a lot of inappropriateness at this time. There is even another story of a Carcat cosplayer getting a bucket thrown at them from people trying to stay in character. It was a lot. I'm having a hard time remembering any other stories right now, but I'm sure it'll come back to me later. I think a lot of these fans didn't really have the social awareness to understand how awkward it can be, and there's actually a reason for that. With data taken from McCluskey's 2020 thesis on Homestuck, it shows that the amount of fans under the age of 18 grew as the comic became more popular. This shift took place sometime between 2012 and 2013 when the comic's popularity soared. If we look at the 2013 Homestuck survey, we can see that 45% of the respondents were ages 14 to 16. And Homestuck survey writes about this. The most obvious reason would be Homestuck's choice of media, that being an online webcomic. While internet usage has been steadily rising for all age groups and countries where it is widely available, usage is still highest in younger age groups polled. Younger people, particularly those who cannot or can barely remember a time before the widespread use of computers and the internet, have grown up with it as an important, if not the most important, source of information, communication, and entertainment. Homestuck, along with all other webcomics and internet-like web series and online fiction, are all examples of media rarely found outside of cyberspace, and are most accessible to those who spend the most time online, i.e. younger people. Homestuck, while being filled with plenty of content that would gain it an R rating if it were a film, doesn't seem specifically aimed at adults, and though what exactly qualifies a work as being young adult fiction is a topic for another time, with the majority of the characters being 13 to 15 years old themselves, as well as the inclusion of such relevant themes, the meaning and responsibilities of adulthood, and the loss of familiar spaces and family, are very pertinent. A teen who is possibly losing a family member for the first time may find identity with the characters in Homestuck who have too lost their family, and a young adult heading off to college might too find identity with kids who have been whisked away to another planet from the only home they have ever known. And yeah, cosplay is something that a lot of people gravitate to, especially if they feel othered in their normal lives. It allows you to take on a new identity completely and play someone you're not, to not be you for a bit, to forget about your life at home. Like with a lot of other fandoms, people gravitate towards them to find community. Homestuck itself having these themes that a lot of younger audiences can relate to, it makes sense why they would gravitate to then cosplaying, playing as these characters they like, and meeting up with other cosplayers to talk about the story, going to conventions, not having the most social graces about it. It makes sense.
Why is the room covered in gray body paint?
Look, I was putting on my cosplay and it just kind of happened, but...
You didn't seal your body paint, did you?
Now on to the body paint issue. Homestuck cosplayers literally left their mark on convention furniture, other cosplayers, hotel rooms, and more. Seal your body paint became a common phrase within the convention scene. Most conventions today have rules in place on sealing your body paint because a lot of first-time cosplayers did not know how to seal their body paint, and they would put it all over their arms and legs, and it would get on everything. You should not put body paint on your arms and legs. You should use colored tights or arm sacks or something. I use colored tights. These are gray tights that I cut holes in for my fingers. People just didn't know these cosplay techniques because they were new to the scene. Body paint, or specifically Homestuck cosplay with body paint, was apparently considered to be banned at certain conventions. One Tumblr user, FlyCatandall, wrote, "Our manager's really upset about the amount of cleanup required after the Homestuck cosplayers we had last year. Bathrooms and bathtubs were covered in gray body paint, and the pool and hot tubs had to be drained and cleaned because some of them thought it would be a quick way to get it off. Manager is thinking of putting in the contract with the con that they have to ban Homestuck cosplay to prevent this in the future. So as a Homestuck, I beg you, please don't do this. Clean up after yourself." Now I must address the Sharpie in the room. My camera I just threw the Sharpie and the whole thing crashed. It crashed before when I tried to throw the Sharpie. It really just doesn't like that. Pretend I just threw the Sharpie. By this point, the story has been talked to absolute death, to the point it's not really that funny to me anymore. Okay, I still get a kick out of telling people about it, but One popular story that was circulated back in the day, and pretty much anybody has heard of if they even know what Homestuck is, it was first posted by the now deactivated Phantom Shadow account on Tumblr. It apparently links back to some previous posts, but I have not been able to find any archive of whatever post it's from, but they so generously quote the story in there for us. I'm not going to recount it word by word, but basically it goes where people have to room with this annoying weeaboo cosplayer who happens to also be a Homestuck. She then locks herself in the bathroom for several hours, causing problems for the other cosplayers in the room as they need to use the bathroom to get their cosplays on. Finally, once people barge into the bathroom, they find that she's filled the bathtub with Sharpie ink and rubbing alcohol to dye herself gray like the trolls. There's no further mention of what happened to this girl afterwards. There's no photo evidence of this at all. The story itself is written in a very mean tone. You can tell what the person's bias is against Homestuck cosplayers. They make use of the R slur, they call the girl a ham beast. Many people truly believed the story for a long time, and some still do, but a lot have changed their mind over time. So on my Google forums, I polled people to see if they believed if this story was real or not. I wanted to see if there was a difference between what non-fans and fans thought, and there actually wasn't that much difference. Around 62% of people chose somewhat, I think it is possible. And yes and no were pretty equal, while no was a few percent above yes. And reading through the reasoning for a lot of the yes answers, honestly just go back to how they think the story is absurd and that it would be incredibly funny if it was true. I read 6 responses that were either just the word funny or were like a sentence that just boiled down to saying it's funny. While people might not think it's entirely plausible, a lot of people want to believe it essentially because it's funny. Meanwhile, a lot of the reasoning for answering no basically talked about how the story itself is very unrealistic. Did that girl get medical help? She would have had severe poisoning if she was in that bath for several hours. There isn't like photo evidence at all, no pics or it didn't happen. The reasonings I got from people answering somewhat range between these types of responses. Some people just saying it'd be funny if it happened, and the others pointing out it's not that realistic, but I don't know, I wasn't there. Here's some of my responders' thoughts on the Sharpie bath incident. What the fuck did I just read? I think it's a funny story, but I don't think it happened. I mean, there's the smallest chance that it happened, but it really just sounds like a story someone would make up for attention or due to not liking a fandom or person in that fandom. I never questioned its veracity, however, I wouldn't be surprised if it was makeup to make fun of the Homestuck fandom. Genuinely concerned for that girl's mental well-being, and feeling extreme sympathy for everyone in that room and the hotel that had to deal with it. Hadn't specifically heard of it before, but Homestuck cosplayers failing badly at coloring their skin appropriately was circling as fandom stereotype / gossip for a while, to the point it's one of the first things I remember when I'm reminded of the fandom. I think that the person probably would have poisoned themselves and made the news if it was real. It's believable, and I think someone is that dumb. I've heard from some people that they poured vodka in the bath too, which I do not believe. It's funny at first, but it's such a monolith in the fandom history that the humor is kinda dried up. I understand why most outsiders love the story. I do find it very funny, I fear. If I had a golden doubloon for every goddamn time I've heard about the Sharpie bath. Funny as shit, and I wish I was there to see it. The story itself encapsulates the way people felt about the Homestuck fandom at the time. Annoying to be around, selfish, and will cause problems for everyone around them. But it's become somewhat of an inside joke within the fandom to joke about the Sharpie bath. There's plenty of merch being sold on like Etsy about the Sharpie bath. During Requiem Cafe's Homestuck event, they even had an alcoholic drink based on the Sharpie bath that you could drink out of a literal tiny tub. It is funny in concept, but I generally agree with the sentiment that, yeah, this probably could have happened, but pretty much every detail about it is heavily exaggerated. Say somebody could have tried to dye themselves with non-toxic dye, but then somebody just exaggerated them and their personality to fit a stereotype at the time. So with these things combined, Homestuck cosplayers became kind of like a boogeyman to the convention scene. Of course, it was meant to be targeted at the bad actors of the fandom, but in an effort to do that, it just kind of got targeted at everyone in a way. Cosplayers just didn't want to be associated with Homestuck fans, no matter good or bad. So I believe that with all these things I've mentioned, Homestuck cosplayers form their own subculture. They have a media property that unifies them, they have a specific way of dressing up, they are seen as deviant and disruptive to a greater community or society they exist within, if we take the convention and cosplay community as their society. If we call back to what Nepeta told us earlier,
are always in the process of acting upon, and being acted on in turn by, the world around them.
Homestuck fans acted upon their interest by being loud about it, being annoying about it, making fan content, making new cosplays whenever a new update came out. And they were acted on in turn by the society they exist in, by how people reacted to their cosplays. People didn't like how simple their cosplays were. People didn't like how many of them there were. People didn't like the way they acted. They were pushed back on and shunned in some cases by the greater society they exist within. People hold a great air of nostalgia around the whole thing. People talk to me as if they're veterans recalling their old war stories, or some people I think I incite like fears they've once forgotten, but they seem to just kind of find it novel in general that I'm keeping up this tradition. And with it being long enough for people to be nostalgic about it, one of the most popular fan projects about Homestuck is talking about Homestuck cosplay culture. Carcat Goes to a Convention is something that I just can't not mention because it's one of my favorite projects, but it's a retrospective on the fan culture, what it means to be a fan, and also just a retrospective on the story of Homestuck as a whole, how people reacted to it and how people expressed it. It digs into the awkwardness of how people interacted with each other and the weird roleplay and opinions people had. It's really entertaining to read. But enough of that. The Homestuck cosplay scene is by no means dead today. I mean, I stand before you in full Homestuck cosplay, I think, to show that. Homestuck itself has had a bit of resurgence now, with Homestuck Beyond Canon updating the Requiem Cafe events that have taken place the last 2 years, or Discord servers like California, which is a California-based Discord server, to specifically organize fan meetups with each other. They're even bringing back Promstuck this year, which I'm totally going to be at, and I'm really excited to experience for the first time. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you to Professor Fallon for having such a awesome class. I really enjoyed attending it. And thank you to those who filled out my Google form. It was really helpful for my research. And I apologize if I got any details wrong in this video. This is just a school project. I only had a few weeks to work on it, so I'm doing the best I can here, okay? Give me a break. I was working on this project alongside with like several other finals I'm working on, so let's just hope it ended up good in the end. And now some parting words from some of the beautiful messages I got in response to my Google Forms. A fool said, "I don't know if I regret taking this questionnaire." A Jack said, "I am taking half of this shit to the grave." Kai said, "I would like you to reflect on what led you to where you are today." How? Anonymous said, "I had a knife on my back this entire time." Addison said, "Hi Lily." Hi Addison.